Voice of the Voiceless, Deshon, Porter, published by Deshon Porter, 2026. This is a work of fiction. Similarities to real people, places, or events are entirely coincidental. Voice of the Voiceless, first edition. April 10, 2026. Copyright 2026. Deshon Porter. Written by Deshon Porter. Voice of the Voiceless by Deshon Porter. Prologue. The night the chart changed when the first morning after the release of Our Wedding Day arrived, Deshon Porter woke to 1,000 new messages had no time to read. His phone dialed like a small animal, soft and frantic. Studio lights still burned in his apartment across from the harbor. An empty bottle of celebratory champagne slept in the sink. He lay a moment, listening to the echo of the crowd from his release party the night before. The clipped applause from TV interviews, the raw roar of 20,000 voices singing the chorus back at him in a stadium clip that had gone viral. 1. It had gone number 1 in a week. That was the kind of success most musicians spent a lifetime chasing. For Deshon, once a neighborhood storyteller with a guitar and a head full of rhythm, the speed of it felt both miraculous and bewildering. Fame had taught him small satisfactions, the way a song could mend a silence between strangers, the trembling hand of a fan who said it saved them, the late-night letters with unread pleas folded into gratitude. But that morning his inbox carried something else, a flavor off attention that sounded like a different kind of demand, invitations to speak on television about more than music, op-eds asking him to use his platform for causes, an email from a grassroots leader in Iowa that said, simply, "You have a voice. Use it." He smiled, not yet sure what to do with that sentence, and leaned toward the window. The city below was waking in slices, cabs like snails, deli lights flicking on, a dog walker-arguing quietly with a leash. He sang the opening line of his song under his breath, because there are consolations in melody where words fail. "We said our vows in a backyard of late summer." Deshon had written Our Wedding Day about memory and promise, about the everyday rituals that promise a forever. It was more than nostalgia. It had become a communal hymn. Lovers arranged porch lights like altars, strangers called their mothers, and 1,000 videos of small weddings used the chorus like an anthem. The song made him visible in a way that made him vulnerable. Fans sometimes made him feel as if his life belonged to them. The first political note he received came from a woman named Gloria Hart, a community organizer who'd run to Deshon Porter. Neighborhood voter drives for 20 years. Her message was a line handwritten into an email. "We need someone who sings to us and hears us. We need a new kind of leader. Think about running." Set the message aside, thinking of all the ways people tell artists what to do. Sing this, donate this, speak for this. He had always been wary of the pedestal, but he had always also believed in invitations. Voice of the Voiceless. Chapter 1. A voice begins to compete. Deshon's first campaign stop wasn't exactly a campaign. It was a benefit concert for a food bank. The crowd was small enough to fit in the church basement where his mother Ansa taught Sunday school. He performed standing on a folding chair, barefoot, comically reverent in front of plastic folding tables covered in cans of beans. Between songs, he spoke about Hungerin, a way that avoided the easy, performative rhetoric celebrities sometimes fall into. He told stories, whose hunger looked like, who went without on what nights, what a childhood of skipped lunches had done to him, and he did it with the kind of intimacy his music had taught him to find. Afterwards, a reporter from a small network cornered him by the coat rack. "People are already saying you could be a candidate," she said, pen poised. "Do you think that's realistic?" Deshon laughed. "This is a church basement, not a caucus," he replied. "I'm a musician, I'm a storyteller. But I tell stories because I think people deserve to be heard. If that's leadership, maybe I'd think about it." The evening carried the first frost of public possibility. That clip of his answer circulated online with 1,000 frames off commentary. Some called it a stunt. Some called it a breath of fresh air. His manager, Tessa, called him a few hours later with restaurant excitement. "You have to be careful," she said. "This could be a tidal wave or a puddle. We need a plan." Deshon slept poorly. His dreams stitched campaign Cincinto concert posters. He woke to the voice of the city and the persistent hum of something forming for Deshon Porter. Chapter 2. The spring of decisions. By spring, the question was no longer an idle one. A grassroots movement on social media, locals and activists calling themselves voices, began organizing town hall-style meetups where Deshon's songs were played on small speakers before people debated policy over coffee. Clips of him in community centers, in rehabilitation clinics, in public housing, listening genuinely to people's stories, moved faster thampolist political ads. He had no political resume. He had never chaired a committee or written a policy paper. He had never negotiated ABLE. What he had was an instinctive aperture for people's pain, an ability to narrate grief into hope, and a stubborn refusal to beg glamour posed. For many, that was enough. At a small diner in Ohio, an old steelworker named Meagle gripped Deshon's hand like a prayer rope and said, "I just want Somion who'll show up." From somewhere near the counter, a young teacher added, "We need someone who knows how to listen and can turn listening into action." Deshon thought of Gloria's email and of the woman in the church basement holding a can of beans like a sacred object. He understood, almost without realizing, that voices multiplied when someone sang their chorus back to them. By June, discussions simmered into private strategy talks. Tessa and a veteran political operative, Donovan Ames, formed an unlikely alliance. She with her creative production instincts, he with his contact book of fundraisers and policy planners. Donovan ran numbers, painted demographics, and grudgingly admired Deshon's capacity to connect. Voice of the voiceless five. "How do you plan to govern?" he asked during one of their sessions. He was kind, but he wanted to know what was insideth man that could win votes and manage the weight that followed. Deshon, weary but earnest, kept his answer direct. "I don't pretend I know everything," he said, "but I know how to listen. I know how to do the work of taking people's stories and shaping them into plans. I want to lead people who are usually left out off the room." It wasn't a policy answer, but it illuminated something for Donovan. Deshon would not be the usual politician 6 Deshon Porter. Chapter 3. Building a Band-Aid campaign is a concert made of unimaginable logistics. Deshon's team became his band. Tessa curated the narrative. Donovan smoothed the pathways between rallies and donors. Gloria kept their grassroots feet glued to neighborhoods. And a young policy director named Aisha drafted platform points with diligence of a scholar and the warmth of someone who'd grown up in similar housing projects, as many of the voters aimed to reach. Aisha, the only paid staffer who could translate the music off people's needs into policy language, liked to say that policy was chord progression. Get the notes right, and the whole piece resolved. She and Deshon worked late into nights, translating listening sessions into concrete proposals. A universal child nutrition program, community-driven rehabilitation centers for addiction and mental health, an expansion of worker retraining programs. They trained him in budgets, in voter turnout math, in the narrow, unglamorous reality of legislation. There were songs to write, too. Campaign jingles are usually dreadful. They lack the soul of music that grows out of life. Deshon refused to slap his name onto saccharine slogans. Instead, he recorded an album of sorts, a set of short, hopeful anthems and gentle acoustic tracks he could play at rallies and use as unifying moments on platforms. The music kept the campaign human. It reminded people that behind committees and policy and punching the clock negativity, there is always something that feels like a well-tended truth. Romantically, life complicated. He'd had relationships before, a tour romance here, a love that lasted the length of an album, pockets of warmth that dissolved under weight. But this voice of the voiceless 7. Campaign demanded more of him than tour had. He learned Thomas late-night phone calls and to trade dates for town halls. He comforted himself with the knowledge that many relationships historically haven't survived public life. Perhaps this one could be different because it was not purely private now. It was shared with a public that had begun to trust him 8 Deshon Porter. Chapter 4. The first primary. The primaries were a testing ground of stamina. Deshon expected skepticism and got it in waves, sharp, sometimes cruel commentary from pundits who marveled at his lack of typical experience. He also faced serious attacks. Opponents labeled him naive, critics painted him as a celebrity cash grab. Traditionalists called him a danger to party order. But something unusual happened. In small towns and inner cities alike, people showed up to fill gymnasiums and community centers with an eclecticity that baffled pollsters. Teachers came with their coffee-stained folders. Union members brought weathered mittens. Activists waved handmade signs. People came with the desire to be heard and with their own small expectations of what leadership could. On debate night in a town hall that smelled of dust and coffee, Deshon faced seasoned politicians. They attacked his vague answers. They pointed to gaps in experience with sharpness. He stumbled on a fiscal detail and nearly lost his footing, but he reclaimed himself with something he'd learned in stage: authenticity. When asked about a complex healthcare bill, he admitted he needed experts in the room, then pivoted Tohat he did understand. What the bill would mean to a child missing school for lack of medicine, to a mother choosing between rent and prescription refills. He told a story and then named the first person he wanted on his advisory team, a nurse from Detroit he'd met at a town hall who had walked him through her clinic's needs. Afterward, opinion pieces that had promised to eviscerate his campaign instead wrote, "He's not a policy wonk, but he knows how to humanize policy." For millions, that was enough. Voice of the Voiceless 9. Chapter 5. A love song amid the chaos. Campaign life is relentless. The glories are brief and blinding. The failures are long and difficult. In the middle of that strain, Deshon met Layla Morno, a documentary filmmaker covering the grassroots movement from the beginning. Layla was sharp-eyed, funny, and skeptical in the way that only those who looked for truth were. She watched with a filmmaker's patience, letting scenes play out, recording gestures and small truths. She didn't ask to be cast in the story. She asked to include it, and in quiet moments between stops, while editing footage in a moat room, over long cups of diner coffee. She found herself drawn deeper. Layla had a lineage of her own, parents who'd come north with little, and a devotion to storytelling that made her a perfect partner for someone who lived in narrative. Her footage caught stars and holes in the floor both. She trained a camera on a labor strike and on a mother reading Our Wedding Day lyrics to a toddler during a power outage. She listened with the same patience she used to frame a shot. She questioned with the same firmness she used to ask for B-roll. Their relationship was not a studio romance. It was deliberate and grown from quiet hours. They spent nights editing campaign ads and arguing over the ethics of image, how much to show of people's pain and how much to protect their dignity. They argued about policy, about art, about whether Ranione could truly escape spectacle in a town saturated with cameras. In 3 months, their affection settled into the kind of partnership that felt like a chorus, 2 distinct lines that harmonized. 10 Deshon Porter. Chapter 6. The storm of scrutiny. As their poll numbers rose, so did the scrutiny. Cable outlets turned personal histories into charters of attack. Old interviews were recontextualized. Rumors proliferated, some rooted in malice, others born of misunderstanding. Deshon learned quickly the difference between a fair question and a calculate strike. He watched as his own voice was clipped for quick takes and later exploded into whole narratives he barely recognized. A scandal erupted when an old protest photograph surfaced of him in his 20s, face streaked with paint, holding a sign that used language some found extreme. Opponents used it toward he was radical. His critics said it made him unelectable. For Somione, whose life had been defined by music and protest in equal measure, it was painful but familiar terrain. He called APRE's conference in a small park, the same park where his first acoustic gigs had taken root. He said this: "I was young. I made a choice then. I'm the same person who learns, who grows, who listens. You can't build a better tomorrow if you're afraid to acknowledge yesterday." Response was uneven. Some agreed. Others saw Dodginger explanation where they wanted closure. But a different phenomenon occurred. Actual voters wrote long letters, not sound bites, about their own young radical years and what they had learned. These letters resonated. Deshon began to notice that people crave an honest account from leaders more than the polished absolutions they often receive. Voice of the. Chapter 7. The policy of heart. In the middle of attacks and fundraising dinners, the campaign attempted a radical experiment. A national listening tour that prioritized town halls where voters could speak for an hour with no interruption. It was messy. People came with laundry lists of grievances. Supporters argued, opponents shackled, but the process produced ideas that never would have been born in think tanks. A policy on universal early childhood nutrition was refined from minutes gleaned at a rural kitchen table in Kansas. An improved worker retraining program was born from a line a factory manager had muttered while they toured a factory floor. Nothing in these policy sessions was magical. It was work. Lists, spreadsheets, pilot programs. Aisha and an army of experts turned these notes into legislative frameworks. Deshon's approach wasn't to wing it. It was to listen and then hire people smart enough to translate empathy into law. He learned to feel at ease in policy briefings the way he'd always felt at sound checks. There were no metaphors to soften the numbers, only rigorous arguments and compromises. He liked the work. He liked how music and politics each demanded different kinds of craft, each rewarding practice the same way, with small improvements that compound 12 Deshon Porter. Chapter 8, Rallying a Movement by Late Summer, his campaign had momentum and enemies. The road became a map of colors, red states he needed to chip into, urban strongholds he still had to move. He performed stadium events with call-and-response refrains, yet his campaign never abandoned the close work. At a rally in Phoenix, a woman with a prosthetic hand told him her story of losing work after an accident. He listened, then promised a program for worker integration. At a union hall in Pennsylvania, he learned about retirement insecurity and made a commitment to advocate for secure benefits. Each pledge was subject to skepticism, but Deshon insisted on evidence-based pilots and on listening committees to monitor real-world results. At a particularly electric rally in Atlanta, he sang Our Wedding Day, not as a love song, but as a promise to the country to stitch together broken living rooms into a national tapestry. His voice trembled at the chorus, and the crowd sang back intentionally, like a chorus of caretakers. By then, his campaign was no longer simply a candidate on a stage. It had become a movement of people convinced that their stories might be heard at the highest levels. Voice of the Voiceless 13. Chapter 9. The opposition's gambit. As the general election neared, the opposition strategized. They tried to paint Deshon as out of touch on national security and foreign diplomacy, concerns they believed might sway older voters. A well-funded PAC released ads showing rapid cuts of his past concerts, juxtaposed with ominous music, implying that spectacle had replaced substance. Donovan pushed for a televised, policy-heavy town hall with foreign policy experts. Deshon prepared as he always did. Hirad, he asked. He sat with the experts, and he rehearsed answering complex questions candidly. When the night came, the moderators were tough, but he held steady, admitting his limits where appropriate and offering a clear framework for how would consult experts, lean on international partners, and uphold democratic values. Perhaps most importantly, he spoke about what national security felt like to people in small towns who craved safety, and to mothers abroad who needed predictable support. He didn't win everyone that night, but he earned a seriousness previously denied him by some voters. A few editorials shifted tone. They wrote about a candidate who had once been underestimated, but who had now learned the trade of governance. 14 Deshon Porter. Chapter 10. The Homefront Politics is a Crucible for Personal Life. Layla, with her camera, began to fear that the campaign was changing the man she loved. Some nights, he came home by twilight, face set by a day off difficult news, and they sat in a silence heavy enough to break. They fought, not showy, public fights, but the quiet irritation of people who both wanted to save the world and remain present for each other. Once, after a long day of questioning about campaign finances, Deshon came home to find Layla asleep at the editing bay, her head propped on a stack of footage. He watched her, exhausted, and remembered why he'd been in love with the patient curation of truth. He picked up the camera she'd left nearby and recorded a minute of footage of the moon over the city of her steady breath, and used it in a late-night, candid video message to supporters, a raw 8-minute confession about the cost of the journey. It worked. People responded with compassion. They sent pillows and notes and quiet offers to volunteer. There were other times when Layla captured small acts he'd rather keep private, banalities like the way he sipped chamomile tea or the expression he wore when thinking of his mother's kitchen. Her footage humanized Tohim for a public that had started to see him as larger than life. Those intimacies carried weight. They made people trust that this man who could fill stadiums could also sit with his own vulnerabilities. Voice of the Voiceless 15. Chapter 11. The convention and the pitch. The convention was a spectacle of flags, applause, and choreography. Deshon watched seasoned politicians negotiate and count compromise as if it were currency. His team worried would be swallowed by ceremony. He refused to be processed like a product. His floor speech, prepared with Aisha and Donovan's outline but written with his characteristic voice, aimed to do something that would make people uncomfortable, to ask the nation to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. When the night came, he stepped to the podium with Leila and Tessa in the front row, and an entire crowd leaned forward as if to catch the beginning of a verse. "You taught me to sing," he said simply. "You taught me thought a chorus is stronger when all voices join it. I'm asking to be a steward of that chorus, not because I have all the answers, but because I have a habit of listening, of bringing in experts, and off-counting the small things that make life livable." Spoke about the water crisis in certain rural counties, about teachers footing classroom bills, about how zealous neighbors whose reality policy often lacked language for. He asked for boldness, the care that would not be satisfied with incrementalism at the price of suffering. He asked for courage to be ordinary and compassionate simultaneously. The speech landed. By the following morning, pundits note that a former pop star had given one of the most human and clear convention addresses in recent memory. Donations poured, but more importantly, volunteer sign-ups spiked across swing districts. 16 Deshon Porter. Chapter 12. The final stretch. The campaign burst into its final stretch like an orchestra in crescendo. Budgets were balanced, voter get-out-the-vote teams were drilled, phone banks hummed through the night. Deshon's schedule became both a physical and spiritual test, rallies by day, telethons at night, interviews at dawn. He attempted to sleep between 5 and 7 hours like prayer, pulse fluctuated. There were moments that look at her, unexpected gaffes, vicious false claims, and moments that felt like a communal lift. A viral speech where he described a failing school fixed with community partnerships reached tens of millions and shifted the conversation. The campaign's clear-eyed, compassionate messaging seemed to break through usual cynicism. People who had never thought of voting in years were arranging carpools. Students registered their friends, seniors called their neighbors. On the eve of the election, Deshon and Leila drove out off the city to a small lakeside cottage where he spent the night quietly. No strategists, no scripts, only a guitar, the hum of insects, and the shared feeling of a day's culmination. They talked about the possibility of victory and of losing. Both felt equally sobering. Leila pressed his palm, and he felt small like a child before a stage. The night sky had no audience. It was simply sky. Voice of the voiceless 17. Chapter 13. The long night. Election night stretched like a taut wire. Results from different states came in as choppy data points, then swelled into a narrative. The hours were a strange blend of prayer and calculation. Donovan paced like a restless judge. Tessa and Aisha sat in quiet stoicism. Volunteers glued to monitors whispered about trends. Supporters gathered in living rooms, held vigils, fingers on each other's knuckles. The early returns were hopeful in some places, disappointing in others. At one point, a key swing state flipped back and forth like a coin, and the newsroom's noise rose and fell. The campaign hall hummed with nervous generators and warmer conversation. Deshon sat quietly, tuning his guitar the way a medic checks breathing, while Leila slept in a folding chair beneath a blanket, exhausted. At 2 a.m, the last big projection came in. Thurum inhaled. Then there was a pause, and the hall erupted like a delayed chorus. They had won close, imperfect, by the narrowest of margins. It was a victory built on countless small acts. Phone calls, rides to the polls, volunteers who had stood on some corner in all weather and refused to leave. Deshon stood with his team on the stage, and the crowd sang Our Wedding Day, not a celebration of his fame but a pledge, to hold each other and to keep working. He took the microphone and spoke, tired but exuberant. "This is not just my win," he said. "It's all of us. This is the voice of the voiceless proving it can be heard." 18 Deshon Porter. Chapter 14. The oath. In the snowy morning light of January, Deshon Porter stood on the steps of the Capitol, the weight of a nation's expectations pressing down like the January air. He placed his hand on the family Bible, opened by a congressional aide who had once been a fan, and recited the oath. Voice of the voiceless 19. Voice of the Voiceless, written by chatbot app based on the story of Deshon Porter. Fade in, EXT. Urban harbor. Dawn seagulls, early sunlight on water, a modest city skyline. Deshon Porter, 30s, guitar case in hand, looks out over the harbor, tired, alive. He hums the opening line of a song, Super. Our wedding day, night before, #1 in a weekend. Deshon's apartment/studio morninga, small home studio. champagne bottle in sink. Phones buzz. Deshon scrolls messages, fans, interviews, one email. Gloria Hart. You have a voice. Use it. He smiles. Plays a line of Our Wedding Day on acoustic. A beat. He sets the phone down. 20 Deshon Porter. Cut 2 title card. Voice of the voiceless. Church basement DAYA folding chair. CANS of food stacked. Deshon performs barefoot for a small crowd doing a food drive benefit intimate. He stops between songs to tell a story about hunger. Reporter, 20s. Notebook out, approaches after Deshon. Reporter, people say you could run. Ever think of it? Deshon laughs. This is a church basement, not a caucus. But if leadership's listening, maybe. Voice of the. Cut 2 montage, building momentum. Social media clips of Deshon in community centers. Handwritten sign. VOICES, town hall meetups playing his songs. Old men, students, nurses watching and smiling. Deshon doing short, candid interviews. INT. Diner, Ohio. DAYMIGUEL, a steelworker grips Deshon's hand. Miguel, we need someone who shows up. Deshon listens. He looks up, thoughtful. INT. Manager's office. DAYTSSA, 30s. Deshon's pragmatic manager meets with DONOVAN Ames, 50s, a seasoned political operative. They exchange skeptical looks, then handshake. Donovan, you're not asking for a popularity tour. We build policy, we build credibility. Tessa nods. Deshon enters, hopeful and wary. Deshon, I don't pretend to know everything. I want to listen. Turn listening into action. They study him. A plan begins. 22 Deshon Porter. INT. Campaign war room night whiteboards, maps, volunteers at phones. AISHA 30s. Policy director, literal and brilliant, organizes sticky notes labeled. Nutrition, rehab, retraining. Asia policy is chord progression. Get the notes right and the piece resolves. Deshon remains wholly present. Earnest, improviser learning structure, montage. Campaign team as band. Tessa curates his image. Donovan schedules debates. Asia turns listening sessions into drafts. Deshon records short, soulful campaign songs in a small studio. EXT. Town hall debate. NIGHTDSHON on stage with seasoned POLITSENS. Hefalters on a fiscal detail. The room murmurs. Moderator, your answer lacked detail. Deshon breathes. He tells a story about a child missing medicine. The room listens. Voice of the voiceless, 23. INT. Backstage, later reporters, camera lights. Clips go viral. He humanized Spilici. Donovan and Tessa watch metrics rise. EXT. Rally DAY, larger crowd, and then Layla Morno, 30s, a documentarian with a steady gaze, records from the crowd. She's skeptical, curious. They meet after a conversation over coffee about ethics, off-capturing pain and dignity. A subtle spark. INT. Convenience store late-night old photograph exposes Deshon's past protest opponents call him radical. Cable churns. EXT. Small park. DAY Deshon holds a press conference. Honest, human, Deshon I was young. Learned. You can't build a better tomorrow if you were afraid to admit yesterday. People write letters. Some defend him. The movement matures. INT. LISTNING tour various town halls where people speak with no interruption. Messy real. Notes transform into policy drafts. A building sequence of ideas. ISHAVO. We pilot programs first. Evidence before spin. EXT. Atlanta rally night. Deshon sings Our Wedding Day as a promise. Crowd sways like a single organism. INT. Opponents war room night. 24 Deshon Porter. PAC releases ominous ad. Concert footage juxtaposed with harsh cuts implies spectacle over substance. INT. Campaign office night in a van. We need to show depth. Foreign policy, security. Deshon studies, meets experts. He learns quickly. INT. Kitchen night. Layla and Deshon at a tiny table. They fight about time, privacy, the campaign's demands. Tension, then tenderness. Chef films him sleeping. He uses that footage in a candid video plea. INT. National Convention night. Flags, speeches. Deshon prepares. He goes on stage. Deshon's speech, you taught me to sing. A chorus is stronger when all voiced. I'll steward that chorus. The speech is a hit. Volunteer sign-up spike. Voice of the. Montage, final stretch, phone banks, volunteers at polls, Deshon at rallies, coffee in hand, tired but singing, Donovan packing, Tessa calming, Layla filming quiet, humane moments. INT. Lakeside cottage night, Evo flexion, Deshon and Layla alone. No team. They talk about victory losing the cost. They hold hands. Layla, whatever happens, you were brave to try. Dshon and I only learned to sing because someone listened. INT. Campaign HQ election NIGHTA giant screen flashes as returns drift. Team watches, nervous raid. 26 Deshon Porter. Fast cuts, RESULTS, narrow margins in swing states. Volunteers holding breath. Finally, the projection flips, the room erupts. The crowd sings Our Wedding Day like a hymn. Dshon to the crowd, this is not just my win, it's ours. Voice of the voiceless. INT. Inauguration prep room. DAY Deshon in a suit practiced. He looks at the inauguration script. Layla by his side, camera off. A gentle, private moment. EXD. U.S. Capitol Inauguration Day. Day snow on steps. Crowds. Deshon places his hand on a Bible. He recites the oath. Layla films unobtrusively. His voice steady. Dshon oath, I do solemnly swear. Montage, early presidency. He meets community leaders, nurses, teachers. He signs the Child Nutrition ACT at a community center, kids cheering. He visits a rehab center, meets workers, announces a pilot. He listens in town halls, no podium, just a chair. INT. Oval Office night. Deshon sits with Aisha Donovan, policybinders, handwritten notes. He's still learning. He plays an acoustic riff to clear his mind. Aisha, you turn people's pain into plans. That's rare, Donovan, and politically efficient. Voice of the voiceless 27. Deshon smiles, tired and grounded. EXD. Public school gym. DAYA newly funded school lunch program demonstration. Parents clap. Kids run. Layla films, voice trembling with pride. INT. White House hallway night leaks criticism. The opposition never sleeps. Deshon fields a tough question about national security. He admits gaps, then names advisors and a concrete plan. Deshoni'll surround myself with the best and listen to the people who live with these issues every day. INT. Rooftop, night. Deshon and Layla look at the city. He reflects on old griefs, the last lover, the struggle that made him care. She takes his hand. Layla, you kept doing what you always did, listening. You just made the room bigger. Deshon, we made the room bigger together. FINALMONTAG. THEFDRMATHOFCHANG. Community centers thrive with federal partnerships. Reformed worker retraining program gets bipartisan praise. Volunteers who used to stand on corners now teaching civic engagement. Deshon at a small church basement, playing for a food drive. The circle closes. INT. Studio night. 28 Deshon Porter. Deshon records a new track. Voice of the voiceless. He finishes the last line. He smiles, thinking of the people who made it possible. EXD. Harbor, dawn, back where we began. Deshon walks with Layla. They watch sunrise. He hums the chorus of his new song. People begin to arrive at nearby community center. Volunteers, kids, elders. Life continues. Messy, hopeful. Dshon VO. Soft, we're not done. We're just beginning. Fade out. THEENDVOICE of the voiceless 29. Don't miss out. Visit the website below, and you can sign up to receive emails whenever Deshon Porter publishes a new book. There's no charge and no obligation. https://books-to-read.com/r/BABBTLF10 connecting independent readers to independent writers. About the author, I'm the host of the Big D Zone, a widower since August 28, 2016. I have many disabilities, and so podcasting and entertaining is my only work. About the publisher,